Hi, welcome to Table Talk, and thank you for joining us today. My guests today are Scott and Sue Allen, who lead marriage classes in Crossville. Welcome to the show, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming down the mountain into McMinnville so we can film and get to. Marriage is just one of those things that, like, we've all almost, been there and that kind of thing. So I thought this would be a great topic for us to talk about. You all, I guess, teach courses on marriage. Marriage is in all seasons. And you focus, is it called Marriage, A Lifelong Love?
Well, we are doing a series right now called A Lifelong Love, yes, by Gary Thomas. So that's just one of the series that we're doing. We're currently nearing the end, but...
This particular class, it's an 8-week class.
Okay.
And we've got one more session of this particular class.
So tell me how you both got started in this as far as teaching classes, because that's something that is almost a calling, I think.
Well, yeah, I think that's a good way to describe how really we got started. We've been in marriage ministry for about 12 years, and just kind of felt, like you say, a calling to offer classes, and we've done events and retreats and things like that over that time frame. And really what we found is by helping build into other marriages, it's really built into our marriage. So it's not a one-way street. We've been able to glean as much out of it as anybody as we're leading classes like that. Yeah.
I'm sure. Sue, what whose idea was it, I guess, to get started? And you were on board, or was it your idea?
Well, that's a great question. Actually, it was initially Scott's idea. He came to me and said that he started to feel a call that we should do some marriage ministry, and I was not there. However, what did happen, our pastor had asked us to take an assessment as part of the lay ministry, and it was a Prepare Enrich assessment, and it was after we took the assessment that I saw that though we really had a good, strong marriage, that there were some things that probably could use some attention. And then after doing that, and then he also led an Art of Marriage at our church. And after seeing and attending the Art of Marriage, I had this new hope. I was like, wow, there is more for our marriage. And that's really, for me, what kicked it off. Once I was like, okay, well, there are some things that we maybe put over here to the side and said, this is as good as it gets. That's not the case. So we found that hope, and that's where it kind of began.
Yeah, and one of the things we were doing at that time, we each were kind of leading our own areas of ministry, and our children had just the last one had left for college, so all of a sudden we thought, well, let's do I was thinking, let's do a ministry together, and again. You kind of led into the marriage space, if you will, and so that's the timing seemed to be right at that time.
Yeah, well, such a need for that. I mean, that's kind of one of those things that it's almost like trial by fire, and you kind of do something like that when you're young, and you hope you come out in a good place on the other end of it. I mean, we learn so many lessons along the way, but it's tough. So let's talk about marriages in all seasons. What do you think is probably the most difficult season of marriage? Each of you may have different opinions on that.
I mean, it's here's my answer is they're all tough. You think about the newlywed phase, and you're getting used to each other, and kind of a bed of roses for a while, but if you don't come into it with some preparation, it can be tough. Then you get into the parenting stage, and you get, whether they're toddlers or older, of course, those are tough seasons. When they leave the nest,
The empty nest
the
season.
empty nest is tough because you've
Initially.
Right. That's where I'm at now, and I'm kind of getting refreshed by
Yes,
that,
yes,
you know, and
yeah.
finding one another again.
Yes.
You have a little bit more time for discussion and that type of thing.
Right. And then, of course, you know, as you get older and you have other challenges that come up in that particular season, you know, with health or taking care of elderly parents or, you know, the things that being grandparents. So I think every season, I mean, again, that's kind of my out, but I think every season has its challenges and its opportunities, you know, to then, you know, build into your marriage.
So many people seem to give up. What do you think where does that trend come from, I guess? Is it just where we are culturally, or why do you think that is?
I think sometimes that people, almost all of us, don't really come into marriage understanding what the purpose of marriage is. If you were to ask a newlywed, you know, why they were going to get married, they'd probably say, oh, well, he's this, and he makes me feel like this, and give you all these, you know, warm and fuzzy
I'm in
answers.
love.
I'm in love. And you know, that is true. You do feel those things, but if you don't really understand that the purpose of marriage is not to make you happy, and I think the majority of us feel that it is. So if you go into marriage with the wrong understanding, it would make sense that it's going to ultimately bottom out, right?
Yeah.
And so then that is what tends to happen. And so their expectations are not fulfilled because they expected happiness. And we all know that at some point our spouse is going to do something that doesn't lead us to happiness. And so I think what happens is because of the disappointment, then they begin to wonder, maybe I have the wrong partner. Instead of looking at yourself and understanding that, you know, that really this is not about making you happy. The purpose of marriage is to show the world about God's love for his church. And as a husband and wife, we're supposed to demonstrate that. And I remember the first time I heard that, I was like, whoa. That is way too heavy for me. I can't do that. And that's the truth.
Yeah, it's a lot of
do it.
responsibility.
Exactly. And I can't do it in my own strength. And that is that we need the help from the Holy Spirit to do that. But I think that's why. I think we have the wrong expectation. We think we are going to go into a marriage to be loved rather than to love. And
To show love. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it does tend to, you think, poor me, my person doesn't love me like I
Right.
thought they would, or
Right.
it's died out. But
Right.
that's really not the end of the story, or it doesn't have to be.
it does not.
Well,
Yes.
and I think a lot of it is let's all admit it, we're selfish.
Yes.
And so, you know, we're looking at what I can get versus what I can give and how I can serve and, you know, really how I can build up my marriage and build into my marriage. And like Sue said, you know, you have expectations, and if they're not met, then it can just be a, you know, vicious downward cycle then at that point if you're not stopping and assessing where you're at and saying, let's get this back on track.
Right. So how do you teach people to persevere and to overcome those difficulties, especially if you and your spouse really are not on the same page at times?
Yeah.
There's a variety of things that can happen. People are in different times in their life, and maybe a couple has decided that, you know what, we're really unhappy and we need some help. And actually, that's a key right there, realizing that you shouldn't go it alone. You know, because when you go it alone and you fail again and again and again, eventually you just want to stop. But if someone were to come to us, you know, we could offer a couple of different things. One thing we might, if someone came to us in the midst of trouble, they said, you know what, we're about ready to call it quits, we would say, hey, why don't you let us come alongside you and let's do a strength-based assessment. And then let's see where you have strength and where you have growth areas. And let's just sit down and talk about it. And then through the assessment and the time together of coaching, we can look and see, you know, maybe what kind of tools they need. Maybe their issue is that they have a lot of stressors and they need to learn how to identify them and manage them. Maybe they have a lot of problems coming from, maybe different upbringings, and so they're always pulling against each other, and they haven't really come together. But really, you have to find out where the problem is, and so that's a good place to start. Now, if we have other people, we always encourage people to attend a marriage class, or even just to be in a small group with like-minded people that have the same type of goal, because you can spur one another on and encourage one another. So that's something, and of course, anytime retreats or anything like that, I think key for us, and you nailed it too, was making sure that you have time as a couple. And a lot of times when you're just living together and doing your to-do list, you forget to build into your marriage. So I think just maybe sitting and talking and seeing where the areas are, and then walking alongside somebody. It feels wonderful, doesn't it, if somebody says, oh, I'm having trouble with my teenager, and they're really struggling, and nobody else kind of says, yeah, I can relate to that.
Right.
Then they feel like they're drowning. But if you walk alongside them and say, oh, I hear what you're saying, and kind of share and relate, it seems like they get courage again, and they get renewed strength.
Yeah, I mean, if you surround yourselves with friends that are of like faith probably,
Yes,
and
yes.
working towards the same things, versus if you've got friends that are single and they're out, which is sometimes not everything it's cracked up to be, but it looks like a pretty scene,
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
but a lot of times you want to reflect what you surround yourself
Right.
with.
Right.
So,
Yep.
yeah, that is a lot to think about. So let's go, talking about the best ways to build a solid foundation in the early years. When you're first, you've got those love goggles on, and you're maybe a few years in, which for some people that can be tough too. But what are good foundational things that couples can do?
Yeah, and I think that's going back to what I said earlier. When someone gets married, or a couple gets married, then those glasses may be a little foggy, and you think, well, love's going to carry us through.
They call it rose-colored glasses.
Yeah,
And so-
John Conley had that song, didn't he? He knew all about that.
And so you don't really go into it, love's going to carry us. So why you don't have a plan, so to speak. And so I think making sure that that you're grounded in your faith, together, that you're being very intentional about things you're doing, whether that's date nights, devotions. There's so many apps out there that you can do now that you don't have to necessarily even go buy a book. You can do. I know Sue and I do a good bit of that. Just devotions in an app.
Like on YouVersion, Right Now Media. There's so much available.
Yeah, and just continuing to be intentional about that building into your marriage, and it is a lot of the little things. Yes, it's great to go to a retreat for a weekend, and we're affiliate staff with Family Life, and they sponsor Weekend to Remembers, and there are Friday, Saturday, Sunday events, and those are fantastic. They're wonderful, and they're a stop and concentrate 3 days. But if you go home and don't take those principles back and take some of those ideas back, then it might not sustain for a while. But I think it's creating good habits and things that you're doing that are intentional, on a daily basis. That kind of thing. I think getting started out, and because a lot of times you look up, and as we've talked about, different seasons of your life, you're busy raising little kids, and then there's always something's always pulling on our marriage, right? So as long as we're making sure we're being intentional about building into our marriage in some aspect. And I always say staying connected. What does that mean to you as a couple, staying connected? And it might be that particular week or that day, that week, that it's going to be busy, but boy, you better make sure you're returning back to where you need to be, and that's staying connected.
One of the things that Gary Thomas said in his book that I think is very nice is he said, be careful, especially for like newlyweds, or you've been married a couple years, be careful about thinking that passion is what's going to carry you through. because again, that wanes, it ebbs and flows, right?
Right.
But if you have a purpose together, if you have a united purpose, and you're giving into that, it's almost, it renews you, it refreshes you. So
Right.
he suggested that, and I really like that, especially as Christians, as believers, to give back to others and to do that. And Scott actually talked about that earlier. When we were in church originally, we were doing things, but we were doing so many things separately. But when we started to do something together, it was like, okay, we're fighting for this, and then we united and we were strengthened, and it was good for us.
Right, and that makes you feel good about what you can accomplish
Yes.
and all of
And it
those
also
things.
reignites passion.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I've my kids know I've given them lists that I wish I had have gone through whenever I was, at that age, and little things I think too, talking about, how do you see yourself raising your children? Do you want to be really involved, or do you want, do you just kind of look through the glass at? There's so many different questions that we could talk about before, but for some reason, couples tend to not do that because they're just too busy being in love.
You have to think about it. When you're in love, you're kind of feeling like you're at the top of the mountain, right? And you just don't feel the need. Fortunately, a lot of times, people, a mentor might come alongside you and say, I really think it'd be good for you to do this. Because I think back to some of the couples that we coached, that we did Prepare Enrich with, they did it because they were kind of instructed to do it, but after having gone through it, they saw such benefit. And I think that you just think you don't need it. You think you're invincible.
Yeah, you're solid.
Yeah,
And you're,
yeah.
you're good, and this is your mate. You're, and
Yes.
you are committed at that point.
You are, but you are so unaware of what the future holds.
Right, and that brings me, I guess, to think of like challenging times, that what I consider kind of the middle years, which you have all these stressors. You're kind of in the middle of your career. You have children. There's financial strains and things like that. How do you counsel couples that have these stressors? A very demanding job, or they may have a special needs child that is very hard on their marriage. What do you do to kind of counsel people through those things?
Well, I think sometimes we need to take a pause and say, okay, let's see where we're at. A lot of times it's not a big event, it's a drift. And so you look up and you're so far down that it is a big gap there, but it didn't happen overnight. So I think, if you're able to take a pause and say, okay, let's reassess, and again, you can go do an assessment again and see, okay, kind of where are we missing the mark maybe with each other. But I think there's sometimes that together you have to say, I'm saying yes to a lot of things, or I'm saying no to a lot of things, and I need to make sure I'm prioritizing the things that need to be prioritized. And so, yes, raising the kids and making sure they're healthy and they've got opportunities and all those things in your career, you're in the middle of that. But I think a lot of times that people think, well, I don't have to. They don't realize they have to really build into their marriage. Because if it's anything running itself is running downhill, so you can't just wake up and think my marriage is going to continue to strengthen if you're not doing things to do that.
Right.
So I think if being aware, and hopefully they're keenly aware, or like we're talking about, if you've got folks you're walking alongside and can kind of say, hey, by the way, as a reminder to say, you need to make sure. We were very fortunate that our parents took the kids and gave us some time,
Right.
whether it was a date night or whether it was a weekend or a week, not every other weekend and things like that.
Right.
But it was a chance for us to get back centered. So there again is an opportunity for us. We're grandparents. to offer those kind of things to our children as well.
Yeah, that's what I think. Sometimes paying it forward, we all, it really sometimes takes a village to get the kids, up and grown, and we have to have that help. And it's great to pay that forward to our
Yes.
kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and sometimes I've heard people say, well, my parents won't do that, or my parents aren't in a position to where they can do that. And I'd like to say that it doesn't just have to be your parents either. I hear people say, oh, we don't have any grandchildren. I see in the church people who would love to have grandchildren but don't have grandchildren. It's a matter of reaching out, and on both ways. If you're somebody that's looking to pour into someone's life, somebody would welcome that. Get to know, forge relationships.
Right.
Again, I think don't do it alone, because you're talking about these people in the very tough, in a very difficult situation. They're probably thinking the last thing I need to do right now is one more thing. I don't have time to go take an assessment. I don't have time. So I think what Scott is suggesting about assessing where you're at and maybe peeling away some of the unnecessary stuff, but also seeking someone else to walk alongside you. So be in a place where you value the views and the characters of the people you're with, and see if, maybe they'll help you now and you can help
Right.
them later.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
and there's, in a church setting, there's people of
Perfect.
all ages
Yes.
there. You've got
Right.
people that do have grandchildren or not, that age group anyway, and forging friendships with the younger
Yeah.
members and helping
Yeah.
them along.
Yeah.
So, I hear sadly sometimes later in life, people actually, after their kids have grown, they decide to part ways. But at that juncture in your life, you've been through a lot together. Is the marriage repairable at that point? I mean, it's a lot to go through. I know it's tough, but I'm sure people still make it work even after all those years.
Yeah.
Makes me think about, like, when we sent our kids to college. They came home, they went to a Christian college. They would come home and tell us, oh, so-and-so's parents are divorcing, so-and-so. I mean, often. And it was really quite shocking to us, but I think, what can go wrong is people put their children before their own relationship, and it's a very difficult thing, because I know he traveled a lot, and so I was with the kids a lot, and so
They
it was,
bonded with you a
yes,
lot,
and so it
right.
was something that we had to be careful of. But the answer is that with God, everything is possible. So no matter what point their marriage is in, of course they can if they're willing. But I think sometimes people just keep putting things on the shelf, and they think, well, I'm going to raise these kids. I'm going to do best. I'm going to do what's right by my kids. And then for some reason in their mind, they think once they get them to college that it's still not going to damage them if they get a divorce. But it's still very difficult on the kids, because they're like, I didn't even know. I didn't even see
Oh,
that.
yeah.
But they can, if they're willing to put in the work, I think at any time that you can
And I think
salvage.
And I think a lot of times at that point, you need to understand why you got married in the first place. And, we forget that. At that point, if we're talking about college, it's 18 years later, it's 20 years later. And if you've not really done a whole lot of building into your marriage, then you look up and yeah, there could be a big gap. But I think yes, there's always hope. There's always hope. But to go back and kind of understand if they're willing to put in the work and they're both willing, actually, even if only one's willing, work on it.
Yeah.
Go back and fight for that, for that marriage. And so I think there's always hope in that case if we're willing to at least be willing to step out and say, hey, let's get back on track here, and to get back to maybe some of those core things that were left maybe for many years.
Well, you all talked about, church and things like that. A lot of times, at least attending together and things like that, even if you're not talking about your marriage, it is a good way to come together, and you've got common morals and values that you both tend to agree on, and
Right, that's a good point.
a
Yeah.
good foundation. As we've kind of talked about, it's a lifetime of work, but the good normally for most everybody outweighs the bad. Let's talk about some of the rewards of hanging in there and the fruits of your labor that you've put in all these years.
Yeah.
The-
Well, let me say
Go
one
ahead.
thing is to lead into that, because I think marriage is one of those things that we think that we don't have to do a whole lot of work in. And boy, we'll work for our career. I mean, we'll go to, we're working our career. We're going to be fit, in your health, and you're going to do the right things. But for some reason, a lot of us think we can just set that aside. I got married, and we're just going to continue to stay married. And there's so much more to marriage than just staying married, than being just married, right? We want to be more than just married. So I think that's the thing that we have to understand, that it's going to take some work, and there are going to be a lot of rewards at the end when we think through that.
Well, too, I mean, there's nothing, I think of one of the rewards is when your kids come back home and you get to spend time with your grandchildren as a couple, and you've modeled that to your
Yes.
to your
Exactly,
children, that
exactly.
you work through
Yeah.
things, and in the end you become their foundation for a strong marriage.
Right, you see that. That's what I was going to say, was the seeing that your children live out what you modeled. If you poured into your marriage and you poured into living a Christian life, getting to sit back and watch your children, really, as I look at my children, I feel like they have a higher ceiling than I had. So in other words, they've accomplished more, not things, but through their love and their faith and just who they are as people. And that makes me feel good. I feel like, wow. I mean, look at my as they parent, I'm like, wow, they parent so well. I mean, and I would be like, above me, and you're like, where did this come from? And sometimes we say we have wonderful kids in spite of us, thanks be to God. But yeah, it's definitely getting to see your children, your grandchildren, and as Scott said, he said with his mom just passing, getting to see, we heard everybody talk, give a testimony or
Tribute.
a tribute
Right.
to his mom, and just to hear each one and to hear what was gleaned from her, and then to see them actually living it out, the legacy that goes on, and then obviously the ultimate reward is hearing, well done, thy good and faithful servant, and you can't ask for anything more than that.
Right, and it is very rewarding. We've been in, like I said, this marriage space for a dozen years, and somebody that you maybe have walked alongside, and it's been maybe years, and all of a sudden, you get a phone call or a text from somebody, kind of giving testimony to maybe something that they learned in one of your classes or the retreats, or somebody sends you a picture of something that happened 8 years ago.
Or a ministry that they have started
Yes.
now
Yeah.
because of their experience.
Yeah, we've been very, very fortunate and blessed that some folks that we've been in ministry with have then gone on and done their own ministry. So that's
wonderful.
very rewarding. But from doing it in a ministry standpoint and helping others, but just individually to a legacy. I mean, that's not meaning we're self-serving and we're arrogant. No, but to think that you're doing your best to leave a legacy that shows that family and marriage are important, and stay in there and fight for your marriage if you have to, but build into it, because just like Sue and I experienced, I mean, we had a good marriage, but it can be better. It can be a great marriage, and it doesn't stay at great unless you're continuing
Right.
to really build into it.
That's a good point, and I love the fact I'd never thought about assessing things from time to time, every so often, because I think we take for granted that we are always on the same page, or we're never on the same page in some instances,
Yes.
But an assessment is something that can show you maybe that you have more that you agree upon than you don't.
Well, and one other thing on that assessment is you have an opportunity to maybe something you wouldn't share, but if you're going through an assessment, then it gives you something to discuss, and sometimes maybe you wouldn't discuss, And then I know that we we've taken assessment, and you take it a couple years later, and you can see some improvements. Well, they didn't just happen. It was because you were doing things to improve and to build into your marriage. So it's good to see some of the fruits of your labor there as well.
Right.
And then also, I'm remembering a time that we took a personality, and that was a type of an assessment, but it was great because it helped us to understand and appreciate, the differences that we had. And that's something we learned a long time ago. Just because we're different doesn't mean wrong. It just means,
True.
it doesn't mean better. It just means we're different. So you can learn to appreciate each other's strengths and
Yes.
then, work together as
Yeah,
one.
that's
So
good.
that was good.
Well, tell us, I guess, for those that are in the Crossville area and even, counties surrounding and stuff, how they find your information, because you've got some wonderful, that class sounds
Yeah.
like it would be really beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, we just continue to do classes, so there's great opportunities. We have a ministry called Peaks of Hope, and it's there in Crossville. And we have established that about 2 years ago. One of our initiative is, well, most everything is built into the family, but we have a specific around marriages. But we have a website. It's POHTN.com, so POH, Peaks of Hope, TN.com.
Okay.
And any of our classes that we have there and about our ministry is there, and then any upcoming classes are there as well.
Okay. And then do you all have like a Facebook page? I know it's all
Yep.
about social media these days, so.
We
Uh-huh.
just go to Peaks of Hope and in Facebook, and we've got a Facebook page there as well.
Okay.
Thank you
And
for
I
doing that.
noticed, I think you all have a full kind of a calendar of things that come up, and as you're wrapping one up, I'm sure later on this year you'll be doing another class
Right,
at
right.
some point. But thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been so interesting. It's something that I think we all have to sit back and think a little bit about, or need to give more thought to. So we appreciate you all coming and being with us today.
Well, thank you so much for
Yes,
having
thanks
us.
for having
You're
us.
welcome. And I'll say thank you to our audience for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show and all the great information. Come back again next week for more Table Talk.